Good morning and welcome back to my channel, the Dudley Bug. Being as we're nearly on Armed Forces Day now, I decided to do this one next. The video is about a local fella who was called Anthony Booth. No, not that one, this one. To give him his full name, Colour Sergeant Anthony Clark Booth VC, because he was awarded the Victoria Cross during the Anglo-Zulu War. Now, before we get on to the video proper and some location shots and so on, I thought I'd mention, you've noticed on my videos, I'm not constantly banging on about don't forget to hit the like button, don't forget to subscribe and all that business. Because the way I look at it, if somebody enjoys the videos and likes them and wants to see more, then they'll watch them, and that's that. But what I am thinking of doing is setting up a Facebook page called the Dudley Bug, where people could maybe discuss subjects, local history subjects, and maybe come up with ideas for future projects. I've already got about half a dozen in mind, but it might be a good idea to set up a Facebook page. Let me know what you think. If you know my real identity, just get in touch with me on Facebook or whatever. If you don't, maybe leave a comment down in the video, at the bottom of the video, and see what you think about setting up a Facebook group. Okay, so I'm here at Brierley Hill War Memorial. St Michael's Church is just the other side of that garden wall, over to my left. I thought I'd do a quick spiel on the Victoria Cross itself. And it was actually established on the 29th of January 1856. And as most of you probably already know, it is the British highest award we've got for bravery. Second in line is the George Cross. And that doesn't have to be earned in the presence of the enemy, which is why a lot of bomb disposal blokes, people like that, get the George Cross because they're not in direct contact with the enemy at the time. But with the Victoria Cross, has to be in the presence of the enemy. The first one was actually awarded on the 26th of the 6th, 1857, though in effect some were backdated to before 1857 for the actions in the Crimean War. The last one was awarded on the 26th of the 2nd, 2015. Up until now, 1,358 Victoria Crosses have been awarded, including 3 bars. A bar means you earn a medal more than once. So yes, we've got 3 people that have actually earned the Victoria Cross twice. 2 of them, I believe, were doing medical work at the time. Now, the reason it was brought in is because there'd been a lot of rumblings about the fact that, generally speaking, medals were only given out to officers of high rank or high social status. So when the Victoria Cross was brought in, it was specifically stated at the time it was open to all ranks, irrespective of how long they'd been in the forces and what rank they were. So it could be for corporals, privates, sergeants and so on and so forth. It's actually made of bronze, which is an alloy of copper and tin. Now, the original ones were cast from bronze taken from some cannons that were captured at Sevastopol during the Crimean War. But we do know, because they've been metallurgical, is that the right way of putting it, scientific tests on the bronze, that since 1914 those cannons haven't been used. They've been using 2 Chinese cannon that were captured during the Opium War in China. The actual lump of bronze that's used for the material is actually called a cascabel, which is the kind of rear end of the barrel of a cannon. Now, we reckon we've got enough bronze left for about 80 to 85 more medals. I'm actually in the grounds of St Michael's Church in Brierley Hill, For those of you that don't know the area, Riley Hill is a small town about 3 miles southwest of Dudley town centre. St Michael is actually the patron saint of paratroopers. Mind you, he's also the patron saint of grocers, so there we are. And this is where Coruscant Booth is actually buried. Okay, then a few facts and figures about Anthony Booth himself. He wasn't a local lad. He was actually born in Carrington, which is about 2 miles from Nottingham, on the 21st of April 1846. Parents were called William and Sarah, and he had 3 sisters and a brother. In 1864, he actually tried to enlist in the Royal Marines at Derby, but he actually failed the medical due to palpitations, which was suggesting something wrong with his heart. But undeterred, he then enlisted in the 80th Staffordshire Volunteers at Sheffield successfully later on that same year. Now, once he was enlisted, just like all British soldiers at the time, he would have served all over the Empire. So he served in Cork and Devon, and then when he was at Chatham in Kent, he got promoted to Lance Corporal. It didn't last very long though, because on the 1st of September 1865, he was busted back down to private for improper conduct on guard duty. Whatever that means, he might have been asleep, he might have been drunk, and whatever. It was no big deal. Being busted down from Lance Corporal to private isn't really thought of as a kind of major stain on your record. Then in 1866, 18th of the 9th, he married a girl called Lucy O'Brien. And then in 1869, he was promoted back up to Lance Corporal. And then in 1872, he went up to Sergeant. Sergeant is 1 rank below Colour Sergeant, but you'll find during Anthony's career, he tended to bounce between Sergeant and Colour Sergeant. No reflection on him. It simply meant that a Colour Sergeant was sometimes needed because it's more of an administrative role, and sometimes they weren't needed. So he would bounce between the 2 ranks. I said, no reflection on him at all. So after that, he served in Malaya, Hong Kong and Malacca, and was promoted up to Colour Sergeant on the 3rd of April 1876. Then in 1877, he was moved to a place called Derby Camp, which is in South Africa as it's called these days, because we then move on to the Anglo-Zulu War, and it was during this war that Coruscant Booth won his Victoria Cross. When Booth's unit arrived in South Africa, they were originally stationed at a place called Derby Camp, and then they were sent about 45 miles south to a town called Lunenburg, because the inhabitants of Lunenburg were quite rightly worried about the Zulus having a go at them. And then on the 7th of the 3rd, 1879, a supply column was sent from Derby to Lunenburg, a distance of about 45 miles. Now, the supply column was 18 wagons, and it had 90,000 rounds of ammunition, 80 rifles and 250 cattle with it. And it didn't reach Lunenburg by the time they expected. So patrol was sent out from Lunenburg heading north to try and locate the supply train. It was actually led by Captain Moriarty. Now, only about 4.5 miles north of Lunenburg, they crossed, or they got to, the Intombi River, and there they found the convoy stuck. Basically, most of the wagons were still on the northern side of the river because the rains had swollen and they couldn't get most of the wagons across. So they'd set up the wagons in a defensive position to await the patrol from Lüneburg. It is nice to actually shoot a video in just a t-shirt for once. There's a lot of pollen about, hence I do apologise for all the sniffing and wheezing. So, okay, that's where they were. Most of the convoy was stuck on the northern part of the river. Not much they could do about it at the time. So Captain Moriarty went over to the north bank of the river and took command there. And Lieutenant Harwood stayed on the southern bank with Booth and a lot of the troops to wait for the waters to recede. Now, while they were waiting there, a local native called Intombi turned up and was mooching around the camp. Now, Colour Sergeant Booth at the time didn't like the look of this fella, and he reckoned he was there to scout the positions for a possible attack. Captain Moriarty dismissed this and basically said to Booth, "Oh, it's right what they've said about you. You'd shoot your own brother," which was a bit much. Having said that, Booth still wasn't convinced and didn't like the look of this Intombi fella at all. And he was quite right, of course, because about 4 a.m. the next morning, the Zulus attacked the detachment on the northern side of the river and virtually wiped it out. Captain Moriarty was killed during that attack. A few of the fellas from the northern side of the river did manage to get across the river to the southern side. Now this left Lieutenant Harwood in charge, didn't it? And once he realised what had happened, and he could see the Zulus were beginning to ford the river to the left and the right of them, which is a classic Zulu pincer movement, he promptly jumped on his horse and galloped off south towards Lüneburg, and closely followed by about 50 of the remaining troops. Now this left St. Booth and maybe about 18 or 20 men left on the south bank. Now this is where St. Booth came into his own. St. Booth knew that the worst thing he could possibly do now is run. So with a dozen or so men he got left, he actually decided to do what's sometimes called a tactical withdrawal. So in other words, that is a retreat, but it's done under control so you can still cover yourselves. He decided the best option to provide the best cover was to form a square, albeit a very small one because he'd only got about a dozen men left. Now this decision was absolutely crucial, because if he'd have formed an extended line, in other words just a straight line of men, the Zulus would have been on him and they'd have chopped him to pieces. So he formed a square and then gradually got the men to move south away from the Zulu attack while covering 360 degrees. So anytime the Zulus came close, they could scare them off with rifle fire. Had managed to successfully withdraw about 3.5 miles. They came to a farmhouse and decided that they would go firm there. What that means is basically they would set up defensive positions and await a column from Lüneburg to come and relieve them. The relief column did appear, because it was only about a mile away from Lüneburg by then, and decided to continue north to the Intombi River to hopefully see if there are any survivors. There weren't, of course. Now, Sergeant Booth, being Sergeant Booth, immediately volunteered to go with them, but he was told no, he had done enough, and he had to return to Lüneburg. He was then promoted on the 13th of the 4th. He was actually promoted up to Colour Sergeant, because the original Colour Sergeant, Fredericks, had been killed on the northern side of the bank. And that was the end of the action, the Battle of Intombi River. Now, what happened to Lieutenant Harwood? Well, he was court-martialled on the 14th of the 2nd, 1880. And he was charged with misbehaviour before the enemy. Not cowardice, mind, misbehaviour before the enemy. He was actually acquitted. Now, the commanding officer of all the troops in South Africa wasn't very happy about this, and he refused to endorse the verdict. And as a result of this, even though Harwood was acquitted, he realised he couldn't get the toothpaste back in the tube, and therefore resigned in May 1880. So I'm now going to go to the actual grave of Colour Sergeant Booth. If ever you're here and you want to find it, because as I've found out, knowing the graveyard is one thing, knowing where a particular grave is another. So I'm facing the west end of St Michael's Church. Now all we need to do is turn 180 degrees and come through this row of graves, and then turn left. Okay, so we turned left, and now we're just going to walk down the gentle slope to the grave. Now, after Intombi, on the 26th of December 1879, the bloke in charge of the British Army in South Africa, Sir Garnet Wolseley, presented Colour Sergeant Booth with a revolver, belt and knife, and also recommended him for the Victoria Cross, because there's no two ways about it. Without Colour Sergeant Booth's tactical awareness and command skills, everybody at Intombi would have died. I say everybody, apart from the lieutenant and the 50 blokes that decided to bugger off. And then on the 26th of the 6th, 1880, Colour Sergeant Booth was presented with his Victoria Cross by the Queen herself at Windsor Castle. Of course, Colour Sergeant Booth stayed in the army, and he ended up having 8 children and served in Dorset, Fleetwood, Belfast, Hong Kong, Natal and Dublin. And then on the 7th of May 1888, he was posted as the Sergeant Instructor in Musketry for the 1st Volunteer Battalion of the South Staffs. On the 30th of the 4th, 1898, he retired, and by that time he had completed 33 years and 182 days of service. He actually died soon afterwards, unfortunately, on the 8th of December 1899 of rheumatic fever and jaundice. I'm standing opposite St Mary's Church in Brierley Hill. We're only about 100 yards from St Michael's Church, though St Mary's is on the opposite side of the road. Now, as you can see, this particular church has no graveyard. It's a Roman Catholic church, and this is where Colour Sergeant Booth's funeral service actually took place. So here we are at the grave of Colour Sergeant Anthony Booth VC. Also his wife Lucy and his son William are buried here. Late Colour Sergeant 80th Regiment, died December 8th, 1899, in his 54th year. thy will be done. Now, for some reason that I can't grasp at all, back in about 2017, it was discovered that somebody, or some people, had not just vandalised, they completely wrecked the grave. The stone was down and everything. Fortunately, an organisation called the Victoria Cross Trust got the money together and had it rebuilt. Whatever. So there we are. Anthony Booth VC. My personal thanks for your bravery and upholding the highest traditions of the British Army. Thank you, Colour Sergeant. So, that is the story of Colour Sergeant Anthony Clark Booth VC. As usual, hope you found it interesting. A bit of local history for you. It's not the only VC winner that's buried within this part of the Black Country, but those are other stories for other days, aren't they? So there we are, end of another video. See you on the next one. Remember, it's Armed Forces Day this weekend coming. Until the next time, keep out the Oss Road.